One of the challenges mainstream television faces is sameness. We've all scrolled through the listings and been presented with an endless array of programming that fits into advertiser-supported shows. Advertisers want to speak to as large an audience as possible. They have a product to sell and they want to place their product next to programming that appeals to that broad audience. And therein lies the problem when it comes to the production of programming that challenges viewers to question their perspectives on big issues. Issues that lie at the heart of our society. Globalization, human rights, equality, freedom of speech, freedom of faith, freedom to choose who you fall in love with, and free market economies. In British Columbia, we're fortunate to have a public broadcaster that operates free of influence, a truly independent voice offering a range of perspectives that challenges viewers to think and debate issues. We invited Rudy Buttignol, Knowledge Networks President, to join us for a conversation that matters about the role of independent television in a democracy.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program for the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Welcome. You are running an independent television station in a world where it's really hard to do. Why is it important that independent television stations survive and play a role in our media landscape?
Well, to put a finer point on it, we're a public broadcaster. We're British Columbia's public broadcaster, which means we are owned, in fact, by British Columbians. Mm-hmm. And so we're public broadcasting, and we are independent at arm's length to government and that. And we're there to really represent the interest of all British Columbians. Mm-hmm. And that means everybody that's in the province, whether they're residents, refugees, visitors. We represent everybody in that province. And in a ever-expanding media universe, what's really expanded is commercial space. Yes. That's what's tremendously expanded. And what public space has stayed the same. And so we become even more important because we're one of the few voices that really represents the entire province's interests. We're not there to sell anything other than ideas, a variety of ideas. Well, are you there to share ideas, to enlighten, to enrich the lives of viewers versus just entertain them? No. Now, and I think that there are commercial broadcasters who go, well, hang on a second, we do that too. Well, absolutely. But at the end of the day, I think a commercial channel's interest is to sell advertising. I mean, that's the reality of it. They're there to sell the audience to advertisers. Right. And that's why they're very careful about the demographics that they're interested in. They're not interested in the entire audience. They're not interested in 100% of people. They're not interested in old people. They're not interested in very young people. Mm-hmm. They're interested in the core demographic whose brand loyalties have yet to be formed. Yes. That's their interest, and that's great. And they use entertainment to do that. We'll use entertainment in the sense to get people engaged into important issues or important stories. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's just a means to an end, and that's to sell ideas, not product. You remind me, I one time read a very interesting quote from a past CEO of General Motors who had said, a lot of people think we're in the business of making cars. No, we're in the business of making money. And I think that might be the difference when we take a look at commercial television. Yeah. They're in the business of being in business. Yeah. And whereas you're in the business of informing. We're in the business of being a public service whose primary mission is to really present people with a variety of views of what we think is important for them to consider. And the discipline in public broadcasting is to represent all the views, not the ones that we agree with, not the ones that we're comfortable with, but what we think are valid arguments from a wide spectrum of positions. Because it's, for I think the mission of all public broadcasters, ours specifically, is to give people the information they need to make up the decision, one, to engage them into issues. Right. and debate it with their housemates, with their friends, with their colleagues, then do something about it, whether it's going out to vote, whether it's signing a petition, whether it's getting engaged in civil society. But our job is to represent, to give them the information they need to make informed decisions.
How do you get access to that information, though? Because it's not like there is a huge body of work that's being produced here in British Columbia, or maybe even in Canada, that gives us that wide range of voices. You know, people who make documentaries, who put together these programs, also need to go out and find funding, and it's not in abundance in Canada.
No, well, what we do is we represent programming from all around the world. So we put a lot of our money into a few original BC productions because they're very expensive to do and they're very difficult to do. And then we pre-commit to a larger body of work, the things that we know that are happening in Canada and around the world. And then we acquire. There are public broadcasters all around the world who produce interesting programming. So we acquire that programming from all around the world. We curate it. That's our job. Our job is to go out there and find the programs that are happening, that are being made, being produced, and being distributed that we think will be of interest to British Columbians. And that's the job of curation. And there's no shortcut there. You've got to actually go out to these world markets and find out what's happening. The exception that we have is because we're an alternative to everything that's on in mainstream Canadian media, we have very, very little programming from the United States. Ours is an alternative to American programming, so ours are mostly non-American. So is that because this kind of programming is so rare in the United States? And yet when you take a look at it as a media landscape, I mean, you're overwhelmed. No, there's a lot of good things happening with American documentary in particular. Americans are fantastic at producing documentaries, particularly the independents. It's just that the Canadian system is so overwhelmed by American content, right, that really we thought we would, our value proposition, what we give to our audience is alternative views from British Columbia, from Canada, from Asia Pacific, from Europe, the Middle East, the Far East. So those kind of voices that you won't see in most mainstream channels. So do you sit down going into each season saying, these are the issues that we want to address and this is why? Or are you also in a position where you have to say, well, let's see what's available, and based on what is available, we'll start to build our programming around that? You know, I'd say it was a mix of both. Is that I'm very, very well read. I read a lot every day, wide range of things, and ideas form. So we have this series named Globalization Discontents. Originally, it started years earlier saying, we really need to do something on the impact of global trade and the rise of inequality, how those are linked. And why don't we go look at things on the economy? Yep. Which is pretty broad. And as we go out to the markets, we start to see, we'll see things develop that might fit into that broad idea. I was in Germany doing a workshop, and someone said, what are you interested in? I said, well, globalization. He said, well, we're doing a show on freighting. What's that about? It's about the real cost of shipping. Perfect, an agent of globalization, shipping, one of the oldest forms of globalization. And so you built the British Empire and then Spanish Empire and so on. Yeah. So we said, look, we'll commit some money to that to help you get it made. It was a Spanish production out of Amsterdam being pitched in Germany. And we said, sure, we'll put some money into it. We know who the director is, is really a renowned director, does great work, very provocative work. So that's something we know that's coming. Okay, that'll be ready in 2 years. What else do we have? 2 years. So did you have any idea how prescient that was going to be, especially when we take a look at the shifts that are happening in Europe and also in the United States, that this whole role of globalization and the way that it's impacting people is far more important than maybe we were willing to accept or understand going back even 2 years ago? Yeah, you can never say what's going to be the hot topic 2 years from now. That's absolutely impossible. But you can see what the things that are coursing through society, the anxieties, and you see the patterns starting to form. I mean, after the Great Recession, the financial crash of 2008, all of a sudden people became interested in, well, the world economy was on the brink. And then what was the next question? what is the world economy? Like, what is an economy?
Right.
And,
well, you have that piece about the Fed and its role. It was riveting. I had no idea like what an important role it played, not only in the United States but globally.
Well, the U.S. Federal Reserve, a lot of people think it's a very abstract thing, has nothing to do with them. Well, it turns out, the U.S. dollar is still the world, currency. It's the world reserve currency. It's the one thing everybody agrees has this specific value. So whatever the U.S. Federal Reserve decides to do, raise interest rates, keep them low, has a huge impact. Who would know that by the U.S. Federal Reserve deciding to keep interest rates at historic levels? And guess what? Vancouver house prices have shot through the roof. I wonder if there's a connection. Well, absolutely there's a connection. So those are the kind of connections that we can see. So we know that there's something coming down from the BBC Open University on the US Fed. We've got this thing called Freighton. Then a British Columbian filmmaker, Charles Wilkinson, comes to us and says, geez, I'd love to do a film on why is Vancouver real estate getting out of reach for Vancouverites? And so we commissioned him to say, okay, do something specifically on what's happening in Vancouver. That'll be how we'll localize this huge idea of the U.S. Federal Reserve or Freighton, the world, the cost of shipping.
Right.
And all these things kind of are happening globally, and these are long-term trends. So we, in the world markets, look for people that are doing projects on such a thing and go, great, that one's finished or nearly finished, good. We'll buy it early, sit on it for 6 months or a year. The commission is going to take 18 months to do so. And we know that's coming, Freighton will be coming, and then we start to put together a closer and closer framework for it. And we end up with something called globalization discontents. It happens to be the Nobel Prize winning writers, the economist Joseph Stiglitz. I've read all his work. He wrote it shortly after he was the president of the World Bank, finished being president of the World Bank, and really talked about globalization, something that had been happening with the liberalization of the economy under Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher.
Do you get pushback when you put programming like this on the air? Do you get people who say to you, well, hang on a second, like you're coming at this from a perspective that is opposed to the way that we built our society here? And what's your response to that?
Well, first of all, we do get pushback occasionally. I'd say as we've developed our reputation for these anthologies that we put together, that we're getting less of it because people come to understand it. Like, we're going to present these things, but we'll also present the advantages of globalization. I happen to be an immigrant to Canada, and immigration, I think, is the great, one of the basics of globalization. So I'm glad that a country like Canada let somebody like me in and my parents in. But we present all sorts of points of view, not just the negative impacts of globalization, but also the positive aspects. We ran a series earlier, many years earlier, called The Commanding Heights, and it was under the first blush of liberalization, and had people like Bill Clinton talking about how we've freed the financial markets to be more efficient. And so we ran that series too, and that was a very pro-globalization, all the great things that came out of it, like cheap goods.
Right.
I go to Walmart, you get a great deal.
How do you remain independent? You are funded by the provincial government, to a certain extent, but not entirely. And how do you keep that sort of arm's length relationship that allows you to go out and put together programming that you believe has value?
Well, we're a Crown corporation, so we have an established, we're owned by the people of British Columbia and reporting to the government. And that creates an arm's length relationship in the legislative sense. But we also hold a broadcast license from the Canadian Regulatory Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC, that demands independence. So that's another lever. But we also raise a huge percentage of our operating budgets from the public. From about 39,000 British Columbians donate. And these are people that voluntarily donate. Last year they gave us $4.5 million. And as a result of being a charitable organization, we also have to maintain our independence. So these are the classic civil society, social democratic country that Canada is, that there's different centers of power that are diffused by partnering up with, we're not just government, but we've got we hold a federal broadcasting license, and we're a registered charity, and there's a delicate balance there. We do have to report to government on, or we come to an agreement on what are the broad topics that we'll cover, like climate change and the environment, Indigenous perspectives and stories, the economy, healthcare, providing literacy programs for children. So that's very, very broad in the sense that in no way compromises what we need to do. And then we're free to go out there and do the things that we think are valuable. And I think the fact that 39,000 British Columbians voluntarily donate is a huge vote of confidence, and gives us a lot of leeway to be independent.
So if we take a look at the Knowledge Network over the last 15 or 20 years, the size and scope that you were at one time was significantly more than it is today. Like, you were doing a lot more production here. You had almost a slightly different focus. I imagine that the changing media landscape has affected you the same way that it has everybody else. So how do you go about adjusting to that and ensuring that you're still representing the voices of British Columbians and, producing works that are here for and about British Columbia?
Right. Actually, we've in 11 years we've grown. We were cut back by government a couple of times.
You dipped and then you've been coming back. Okay.
Through our own, we run a social enterprise. We own a BBC children's channel that we raise money with. It's a national subscription channel. Our donors have really grown, almost doubled in my time in the last 10 years. We've almost tripled the amount of money that we're raising from charitable donations. We've launched an endowment fund sitting at $7.5 million that'll start spinning interest.
Yep.
So we've grown that way. But the way, in terms of the disruption the internet's changing everything. We have to adapt to that technology. If you're in this business, you have no choice. You either adapt to the technology or you get out of the business. So we're doing that. We are available. We're available on any device. We launch our own apps. We've got websites. We live stream with or without a cable subscription. You can watch us on a computer or on a mobile device. We have video on demand. We're doing all those things. But what I've always said is we're not a technology company, we're a public service company. And you adapt the technologies you have to stay in the business.
Right.
But what doesn't change? Human nature doesn't change. That never changes. People still have disagreements. People still get hungry. People go to sleep when they're tired. And I've always said, watch human nature. Watch what people are doing, what they're interested in, and communicate to them via stories. That's how people remember things. They remember things by stories. They don't remember things by facts and figures. They remember stories, and through stories you convey. And so we're adapting, and we've never been more popular today than ever before. We're regularly we compete with the major networks in primetime television because we're offering people something they can't get elsewhere.
Well, and they choose to be subscribers. Not just that they turn on their cable, but they become donors.
They're donors. Everybody, you don't have to donate, you can get us. And we're available, because of the Broadcasting Act, we're available on every single cable system, satellite system, internet protocol television set that we're must carry, and we're carried for free. So all these distributors like Shaw and Bell and Rogers and TELUS, they love it because they offer their audience something for free. So it gives us a wide, so we reach 1.5 million people every week.
Just imagine what you could do if all 1.5 million said, yeah, I want to donate and support this independent television as well, because I think that that's where we're going. If we want to see truly independent voices, we need to have viewers and readers support those organizations that they appreciate.
That's absolutely right. And it's interesting because when I do panels, on broadcasting different parts of the world. Europe and Asia were interesting, where they'd ask, where do you get your money? And we tell them we get a chunk of it from an annual grant from the government, but that we also have people that voluntarily donate. And people would say, well, Right, because if they don't donate, they don't get the service. And I'm going, no, the service is available to everybody. You have to voluntarily donate. And I could tell that people were like, there's something, it must be the translation or something, but because it sounds like people donate to a television station.
Yeah.
And finally, a few years ago, I said, we get money from the government and we crowdfund. They go, really? Oh, crowdfunding, yes, of course. How long have you been doing crowdfunding? And I'm going, well, we've been doing it for 35 years. PBS has been doing it for 50 or 60.
Yeah.
No, you mean before the internet? And I'm going, yeah, this is the original, civil society where people believe in an idea and they go, you know what, I'm going to kick in my few bucks every year to support it.
And how important is the role that you play in ensuring that we are an informed population, and in a democratic society that we're an informed electorate?
I think it's really important for my team, the programmers there, to have their ear to the ground, to be reading from a variety of sources, listening to people, for our filmmakers to live in their community and to listen to what it concerns people, and through their artistry, synthesize that to a story that is relevant. And we've got to constantly be on the alert for those stories, to make sure that we're commissioning them, that we're presenting them. And what I've said to my programmers, anybody can program things they agree with, and anybody can program things they like, and anybody can commission films from filmmakers they like. That doesn't take much discipline. The discipline is to program the ideas you disagree with the filmmakers you find difficult, and with things you might not even like. Your job is to measure, is it a relevant story that is important for our audience? Is this a well-founded argument? Does it make sense? Is there a logic to it? And if so, to program it. That's constantly what you have to discipline yourself. You have to constantly check your own biases to say, yeah, I totally disagree with this point of view, but it's a valid point of view.
And it's not easy to do.
No, because sometimes you really disagree with them.
Yeah.
Think, oh my goodness.
Yeah, why would I want to give that person a voice? But it's so important that you do, and I really appreciate that you've, number one, figured out how to navigate your way through this tricky media environment that we're in, and that you are encouraging independent voices. Thank you for coming in and doing that.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah.